So let's jump right into building our first component for our web application. In general terms, the way that you build your web application with Alpha 5 is that you establish your data source, and we've done that. Then you build components that are bound to your data source one way or the other. And then you put those components on web pages, and then you can organize the web pages. So we have our data source. Let's go ahead and start looking at the components that we can build. So from the Web Projects control panel, we will select New, and we're going to start with a web component. You can see that there are A5W pages, which is generally what contains web components. You can build plain standard HTML pages if you'd like to. And of course, you can work with style sheets and JavaScript. And there's a flying start genie as well. We won't be doing that here, but that's useful if you want to have a lot of tables that all need similar components. So we'll go to the web component here and click Next. Then there are lots of different kinds of web components, and we'll be working with several of these. The basic one that has been a standard part of Alpha 5 for some time now has been the grid component. But in version 11, the dialog component has been really substantially enhanced. It's becoming an incredibly powerful tool, and we'll delve into that in a little bit. We will be doing the tabbed UI builder. We might touch on the page layout builder. We'll be building a navigation system, a login component. We'll be working a little bit with Google Maps, so we'll experiment with the video player, the calendar, the image gallery. Well, let's start with the basic grid here and click Next. Now again, you're probably getting, as you go through this series of dialogues here, you'll be getting some confirmations that I've already chosen to suppress. So that's why you might see a little bit different behavior as you follow along with this on your own system. You can see we're actually going to jump down here to the middle part where we're going to show the various types of templates for all or DBF or SQL. Once you choose SQL, this is persistent, not just here, but with any other database project that you have until you change this. So it's an alpha-wide setting. And we'll go ahead and create a grid from a template for starters. And you can see that there are various templates, and you can add and create your own templates and manage those templates once you have them. And we'll start with a basic read-only grid here. And we can enhance this. We can do all sorts of things. So all I can really do at any instructional is get you started and then sort of turn you loose to figure out exactly what you want. But let's do our best for that. So now we'll click OK. And now we have the grid builder. Let's get started with the grid builder, and then we'll look at some more at some of the pieces here. I think once we get started, it's easier to have something in place. So we're first going to choose our connection. A grid is bound to a data source. So we have to select our connection. In this case, it's Alpha Sports, and we'll connect. And you can connect to a table or view, or you can construct a SQL select statement, or you can use a stored procedure as the source of your data for this grid. We'll pick the customer table for our starting point. You'll notice that there is this refresh arrow here once again, the refresh button. This is very similar to the one that we saw in the Database Explorer, that if you have made some changes to the customer table, or you've made some changes to the number of tables in your database, then sometimes after you have a grid already built and you have changed the definition, you need to come back and refresh that with this list here. So we'll select the customer table. We'll let the alias be customer. This is what Alpha knows it as. It'll shorten this up a little bit often. We'll worry about arguments, filtering, and ordering on later on. I just want to get to some really basic stuff here, and then we'll explore things in depth just a little bit more. So we've started our grid. We've said that it's going to get its data from a particular connection, and we're going to work with the customer table as our data source. Then we'll go select a few fields. Now, it seems like I'm racing through this a little bit, I know, if you're new to this, but I want to establish a few parts and pieces, and then we'll come back and take a look at some of them in a little bit greater length. So here in the customer table, we have these fields available. And let's go ahead and we'll put the customer ID over here, and the first name and the last name, And let's do what we did before in the SQL Query Genie. We'll put the bill city and the bill state region over here as well. All right, this is a good pause point then in terms of looking around and seeing what we have here within the grid. We have our data source, which is SQL, and that's all set up for us. We've already gone through this. Then we have our fields. And you'll notice that we have the available fields that are available in our select statement, but these are just the ones that will be displaying on the grid itself. And each of these fields has a property sheet over here. So there are lots of properties associated with it, and we'll explore some of those properties in a bit too. You'll see a search properties here. This whole grid builder has gotten to be such a very large tool with such an extensive feature set that finding what you want can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. So if you wanted to find something, it helps know what you're looking for, of course, and that also is a challenge. You can see that there are a lot of subjects and controls that are in here that you can find various properties. And you'll find the search properties in a couple places. So you can adjust the properties for any one of the fields that is here. And it can, and as I said, we'll get to that in a minute. And then you can also adjust the properties for the grid itself. And that could include your style, the number of rows of data. And I'll encourage you to just take a look down through here at some of the things that are here and explore this if you haven't already. We use some of these, but to cover every one of them would be very, very tedious. Not everybody needs all of these. Some people will use more or less, but it's good to get an understanding of what's here. We'll explore some of this in subsequent videos. Again, there's the search properties here, and again, it's helpful to know what you're looking for, but this is very helpful to find things. So here are the properties of the grid in this first branch of the tree here. And then Alpha 5 has lots of opportunities to take advantage of events. There are server-side events, client-side events, and you can construct your own functions in XBasic and JavaScript. Let's take a minute and talk just a little bit more about each of these. There are things that happen on the server side that deal with the construction, basically, of the grid itself. And when a server-side event takes place, that means that anything that the user wants done actually has to take part in the server. I know that seems obvious, but it's worth restating that because it can take a little bit of time to understand the difference between the two and make sure that you differentiate between server and client side. So you'll notice that the server-side events here actually work with XBasic. And I know that many of the people who buy Alpha 5 come to this for the codeless aspect of it. But you'll also find that getting some code written is not very hard at all. And a lot of people are actually enthused about coming to Alpha 5 because of all of the opportunities to take advantage of the events here where you can write your own custom events. So I want to at least cover that because it's a very powerful part of Alpha 5. Client-side events are the ones that take part on the client side within the browser, and these will all be JavaScript events. So there are JavaScript events and there are XBasic events. You can construct your own XBasic functions, and you can construct your own JavaScript functions. One of the challenges to people for whom this is new is knowing which type of event or which functions go with which. And the basic rule is this, that if you're going to work with the data itself and the basic construct of the grid, then you'll be working on the server side where you need to actually work with the data. And that means working with XBasic in one fashion or another. So that would be a server-side event that works with XBasic. If you want things to happen on the client side, then you would use client-side events within the browser, and that's primarily done with JavaScript. Now, there are some ways to use JavaScript to interface with XBasic to work with the data. And even though I'm showing you some of the code here, don't worry about this too much if this is not quite your boat right now, because there are lots of point-and-click tools within Alpha to automatically do this. There are things like action JavaScripting that get a lot of this done for you, and we'll get into that. But in the interest of covering the parts of the grid, I wanted to do that. So let's just go ahead and we'll save our grid here. And I'm a frequent saver of all pieces, just because they're computers. And we'll call this customer read-only grid. Now, it's tempting to name these file names in a very short fashion, but one of the experts at Alpha Software gave me some lessons in naming grids, and I found it to be very helpful that when your projects get very big, maybe you have 50 or 100 or more grids in some projects and other components, it helps to name them in a good explanatory way. So I go ahead and name these often in much longer names than these. Keep in mind, too, a basic rule that I always follow as a developer, and that is that you may not be the person that has to deal with this next. There's this mythical bus that goes around and hits database developers. You may find yourself moving on to something else later on. Someone else may actually need to take care of this. And quite frankly, you may need to remember what you did just last week. So naming these in a good memorable way and a descriptive way is always a good way to go. All right, so we've done some real basic definition of our grid so far, and let's get off the events here because we're not going to focus on them too much right now. And then you'll notice that there are some preview buttons across the top here, and the two that we'll use the most are the live preview and the working preview. The live preview actually requires that the Alpha 5 web server be on, and we'll take advantage of that in a moment. The working preview is an XBasic implementation of the server, and you don't even actually need the web server to be running. So we'll get into the web server some more later on as well, but let's just go ahead and go to working preview right now, and this gives us our example of what we have so far with our grid. So you can see that we have our columns. You may have remembered that when we were looking at the grid properties that it specified 10 rows in the grid. So if we go to the next row and the next row, you'll see how quickly this responds. And this is actually running, of course, on the local machine. But you'll also find the response to be this quick or even faster on when you load your system up to a remote server and you're serving on the browser. One of the things that I've discovered is that I work with a couple of ISPs that have some very fast web servers, and they're standard for ISPs. And I've actually found that the remote web server is able to serve my local computer faster than my local computer is. So you'll find the response of Alpha's components and its web pages to be quite good. You can always screw it up, of course, but out of the box, and if you just follow the basic rules, it goes very nicely. So you can sort it by last name very quickly in ascending or descending order. This is the AJAX that's built into Alpha. That's going ahead and taking place. And we'll explore AJAX, which stands for Asynchronous Java and XML, soon enough. But you can see how nicely this works. We'll change the number of records, say to 5 records per page. And you get some very instant response with this. Let's go back and experiment now with just a couple of features and experiment with the properties just a bit. We pointed to them, but let's do a couple things with them now. For the first name, let's do something very, very simple here. Let's go to the display format here, and we'll select a predefined format. In this case, let's just make it all uppercase. And you can see that it's filling in for us here. There are a lot of helpers throughout Alpha, and I want to pause for a moment and point this out. There's a helper here to explain the special formats. If that's what you want to use, these are really not pertinent for what we're doing right now with the first name, which is a character type field. But there's a nice helper there. There's another helper here. So when you have a question or you're trying to think about what you might want or what you want to do, you'll find so many helpers here that you'll seldom need to pause too long to find what you want. So we'll click OK. And while I'm on the subject of helpers, you'll see that there is a little bit of help text down here. When we're on the display format, there's some help about the display format. When we go to bubble help, there's a little bit of help about bubble help. Now, both of these make perfect sense to us, but throughout the system, as we set our properties, you'll find a little bit of context-sensitive help for all the various properties in the properties grids that are here. So we can go ahead and define some bubble help. We'll say this is the customer first name. Very simple. And this can be any HTML that you want as well for those who are interested. Let's go to last name now, and we'll just do exactly the same thing. And we'll pick the display format, and we'll select that and make sure that's uppercase as well. I just wanted to do a couple things to get you familiar with what's here. And I think that it takes care of that. So we can go back to working preview right now. And we can see that the names are all uppercased. This doesn't change what's in your tables. It just changes how it's displayed for the user within the browser. Let's go back to design. And I'll encourage you to go ahead and explore a lot of the various control types. And we'll do a bit more later on. You'll see that the control types can be any of these types of controls. And explore some of the other properties that are here. We'll go down here to hiding columns and being able to sort columns and adjusting your styles, that sort of thing. This will all make more sense to you, but I wanted to make sure that you have an overview of what you have and what to work with at this point. So we've made a couple of adjustments to the fields, to the controls that are here. Let's make a couple of adjustments just to the properties of the grid as a whole. You'll see that we have a style name that is currently a project style, and this is usually a good way to go. This is a relatively new addition in version 11. But you can also choose some other styles here that come with Alpha 5. You can, of course, create your own styles as well. Let's just go with a simple gradient blue right now. These are the system styles. And there's global and local styles. We'll worry about some of that a little bit later on too. So I just wanted to show you that you can choose other styles right here. And when you do that, you will see a little bit of difference as gradient blue. We'll go ahead now and we'll pick, say, the gradient tan and change that. And you can see some of the differences that occur right away. Let's go ahead and change the number of rows of data from 10 to 15 so that more rows of data are displayed. We'll go ahead and show a title. And when the title shows up there, we can click on the button for a little builder over here now. And we have a WYSIWYG editor and a source editor. You'll get the WYSIWYG editor, so we'll stay here. And we'll talk about this briefly in a little bit too. Lots of promises about what's coming, but I want to walk you through some things and we'll get a deeper understanding of them as we go on. So we'll just call this customer list. We'll save this. And then go to working preview. And we don't have our customer list title. Actually, we do. We didn't put a break after that. So we have to go back to the title here. I don't mind mistakes while I'm teaching and demonstrating because these will happen to you and it'll help you know that you need to do this too. So now we can go back to working preview and now we have our break. And of course, we could have added a font to it and some other things as well. So let's go just a little bit further now with this particular component. This is nice to have, this working preview. What if you want to find a particular customer, for instance? What can we do with that? I think we'll end this particular video right here, and then we'll launch the next one here and look at a couple of the options for adding a find and search piece to our grid.